Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our virtual session of the Data Tango. If you would like to follow along with some of the materials that we are demoing here, feel free to try them out locally yourself. You can visit this bit.ly link with HOT-1837. All right, let's get started. So this is going to be a demo of what was covered during the Data Tango hands-on training at Tableau Conference. We're going to focus on where integration actually intersects with visualization, especially as we look at new concepts such as AI. A little bit about how the session will work, or at least the demo. We do consider this to be intermediate level. We have two MuleSoft exercises that we're going to show with one final Tableau exercise there on the end. And like I said, if you wanted to give it a try yourself, feel free to look at the session materials. Just a quick reminder here, Tableau is a part of the Salesforce family, and Salesforce is a publicly traded company. So we do ask that you make all purchasing decisions based upon what is publicly available. Before we jump into the demo, we just wanted to start with a thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of the Data Fam. Thank you so much for attending Tableau Conference. I know it was so much fun. I had an absolute amazing time. There is nothing like being surrounded by thousands of other people who are just as passionate about data as you are. And really and truly, you're a huge part of what makes our data family what it is. So thank you so much for your continued support of the platform, as well as for attending Tableau Conference. Our Tableau conferences would not be the same without our very passionate data fam, so thank you. A little bit about us who are going to be leading the demos for you. My name is Lindsay, and I'm a lead solution engineer at Tableau, supporting our federal civilian customers in our America market. And I'm joined by Javier, who is also a lead solution engineer at MuleSoft, covering public sector. So we've got two public sector folks on the phone, and a very interesting topic here. How this demo is going to work, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what the data challenge is and why we think that this is an important topic. We're going to introduce the concept of how the two tools can work together. Then you're going to have the opportunity to see it in action as we actually go through and complete the exercises, and come out with a better product at the end. So let's go ahead and step up to the data challenge. But if we back up for a second, what is the data challenge? What is it that we're talking about? And I know this was a very popular topic at Tableau Conference, but I think everything nowadays comes down to AI. We know that AI has the power to change absolutely everything that we do, but this can also be somewhat of a scary topic because AI also requires a lot of data, a lot. And ultimately, it's also kind of scary because it's actually going to transform the way that everyone works. It's going to be in the flow of work. It's going to be contextualized with data from anywhere you could possibly think of. And it's ultimately going to empower people to do their jobs more efficiently. And so as we think about all the ways that AI can be used at our jobs, in our personal life, for our mission statements, whatever it may be, we need to take a step back because the concept is very cool, but if you don't have the data to actually populate and train your models on and add context to what it is you're doing, then I don't think that you're going to get the desired results. So we definitely want to take a moment and say, how can we get to the data? What data do we think is actually necessary in order to have these bold concepts with AI? What data is available either in our companies, in our lives, publicly, whatever it may be? What data is there that we can take advantage of to make our AI even better? Like I said, Javier and I both support public sector customers, which we absolutely love, but there has been such a huge push to talk about generative AI. As we all saw about like 2 years ago, it was like suddenly that was the only thing that people could talk about was generative AI. And we're happy to do that. And there's amazing things that are going to come out of products in the future, and products that are even available today, products that were announced at conference that are really exciting. But ultimately, what we find is that everyone really wants this generative AI, but they've actually kind of left behind the data-driven decision making and ultimately the data foundations that are going to set themselves up for generative AI. So in this session, we're going to take a step back and refocus on those data foundations. So those data foundations would be, one, how can we even unlock the data that we have or don't have access to? How can we catalog it? How can we make it reusable? Do we certify it? Can we trust it? All those questions that we used to ask ourselves as we were dealing with the data set, we now need to expand beyond and look outside of the box. Are we looking at data sets outside of what our current data set is in order to actually contextualize things? And then how do we create those strong data foundations? That certainly can be very scary, and we have seen our fair share of challenges stand in our way, whether it be the fact that one, the data itself lives in siloed systems, or there's limited IT capacity to actually go in and unlock it, or maybe it's even just manual processes that don't have a ton of data, or they don't actually act together for insights. Maybe there's some concerns around how the data is going to be governed, or is it secure? Some folks are concerned about privacy, and all of those are just blockers to generative AI. But we all know that's where we're going. And as a matter of fact, 62% of IT leaders have trouble keeping up with the demands of the business. I mean, it's scary. That's a lot of challenges that stand in the way. And when you think about generative AI and all the different data sets that you can use to train a model, it ultimately kind of feels like it's compounding these issues. Like if you have these issues in finance and accounting, you have them in employees and HR, you have them in customer relationships, those are all compounding on top of each other and certainly not making it any easier. But we want to take a more positive approach to it. We want to say, hey, despite all these challenges, nobody puts data in a corner. We're data people. We are the data fam, and we are not going to put data in a corner. We are not going to accept all those challenges that stood in our way. Instead, we're going to take advantage of MuleSoft. MuleSoft has hundreds and hundreds of pre-built connectors to unlock all this data, pretty much wherever it lives. I think it's pretty simple to say that MuleSoft has so many connectors that you're likely or unlikely to face something where your data lives and you don't have a connector with it. That is just the reality, is that we have tools within the Salesforce family to connect to all these different data sets. When you connect to them, you have the ability to say like, hey, now that I can see across different data sets, am I actually meeting my mission goals? Am I doing what I said what I set out to do? When you combine MuleSoft and Tableau together, you're getting applications that are connected, data that's connected. You're getting every conversation, every workflow that you could have had with an interaction with a customer or with a constituent or with a product or whatever it may be. All of this is ultimately going to come together to tell one story in a data visualization. We're going to make sure it's secure, governed, and that ultimately it is trusted data. Once MuleSoft unlocks those data assets, then we've just added even more data to our repertoire. We've got our source systems that Tableau can connect to directly. We've got our data assets that MuleSoft has created, and we're going to take those, we're going to put them into the Tableau products like Tableau Prep or Tableau Desktop to ultimately create our visualizations. As we all know, Tableau is great and can embed anywhere, so we're going to take those dashboards that we've made with this new data that was unlocked with MuleSoft. We're going to share it out to leadership, to internal users and business applications, and even like Javier and I to the general public, to constituents who are interested in this data. We're going to publish it on a website for other people to consume. And we're going to do so with the idea that all of this is going to empower our AI. Because ultimately, when you put MuleSoft and Tableau together, you have just a much better dance. We're much better when we dance together. And ultimately, it's going to let our data stories soar. When we look at MuleSoft, we typically see that we have lots of different applications that house data, and MuleSoft, and then we have a centralized data storage. So whether that be a data warehouse or a data lake with products like Databricks or Redshift or Snowflake or whatever it may be that is your centralized data lake, we see that MuleSoft is ultimately connecting those siloed applications to that centralized data storage. And then people are connecting Tableau to that centralized data storage to create their data stories. Now, that is certainly amazing and wonderful, but not everyone is at that level of maturity yet. Some folks aren't even at the point where they have data storage or where they have a data warehouse or a centralized data strategy that is connecting everything together. So instead, we're actually going to take a step back and we're going to look at what it would look like if we took the different siloed data, put it in MuleSoft, and then actually connected directly to Tableau. So MuleSoft has a connector to Tableau where we can publish hyperfiles. So today we're actually going to publish it to a Tableau Cloud site. Some learning objectives for the MuleSoft portion is, first and foremost, how do you even create a hyperfile with Tableau? How can you call that API to update the hyperfile with the data that you got out of a census file? Can you call it again to query the existing project and figure out where you need to populate this? And then ultimately creating the API that publishes the hyperfile to that location that you queried. Once that hyperfile is published with all the data, we're going to do something pretty simple with Tableau. We're going to connect to that published data source, do a little bit of geospatial analysis, and layer the two data sets together. Then we're going to do a simple bar chart and line graph, combining it all together to tell a more informative story with our data. So let's get into it. Let's dance.
In the Anypoint Studio, we have three main sections. We have our Package Explorer, our Studio Canvas, and our Mule Palette. Package Explorer displays the project folders and files that make up the Mule project. The Canvas is a visual representation of flows. You can drag and drop from the Mule Palette into the Canvas to add to your flows. And the Mule Palette helps you manage the modules and connectors in your project. You can also add new elements from Anypoint Exchange into this view. We'll start by selecting Import Project, clicking on the three dots for the file selector, and navigating to our MuleSoft Tableau Data Tango Start jar file. Here we see that we have three different flows. One to create a hyperfile, one to create and update the hyperfile with CSV data, and the other is to retrieve projects. On the right-hand side in the Mule palette, if we click the Tableau Specialist connector, we can explore the various functionality that's available out of the box via MuleSoft. In order to continue, we need to configure our config.yaml file. This can be done by selecting the source main resources, configuration folder, and double-clicking and opening the config.yaml. In the config.yaml, remove the hashtag from the content URL that applies to your session. In this case, we're working on session 1. Under the data source project name, we remove the hash symbol and put in a 1, as this is the session that we're working on. Input the username and password for your server URL. The config.yaml file is similar to an environments variable file. Here we can put username passwords, tokens, secure properties, so that they load at runtime. With the configuration properties set, we're now able to test that we can create a hyperfile. From the menu bar, select Run, Run As, and Mule Application to start the project. This can take 30 seconds to 1 minute in order to start, and you should see, once deployed, a console message that states deployed. With the application now deployed, let's go ahead and open Postman and make our first call. In Postman, we'll notice that we have two endpoints configured. The first one is to create the hyperfile, and the other is to publish, which we'll do next. First, click on the Create, and then go ahead and click on Send. What this is doing is calling our API endpoint that was created in the Anypoint Studio. We should receive a 200 OK status and a body showing the records processed. So in Lab 1, we learned about the MuleSoft Anypoint Studio. We learned about the flows in the Tableau connector. We also explored the various low-code functionality available with the Tableau connector and created a hyperfile using these flows. Now keep in mind that there are over 400 plus connectors available on the MuleSoft platform to connect to external systems, applications, and devices. In Lab 2, we will create the published data source endpoint. This will allow you to create a real-time data feed from your hyperfile created in the previous step and publish it to the Tableau Cloud project. In the canvas, navigate to the Get Projects flow and double-click the last transform message component. Underneath the canvas, the transform message properties will be shown. You'll see that on the left-hand side we have our input, in the center our data mapping, and on the right our output that we want. The input, depending on the system or application connected, will leverage DataSense and detect the metadata. The component accepts input and output metadata from the message payload, a variable or an attribute, and can support various MIME type formats. The center is what allows us to have a visual representation of our data mapping from input and output. In the output, we can represent the output format and the fields for the selected data. In the output section, replace the session hashtag with the session number that we're working with. In this session, we're working with session 1. Next, we want to create our new endpoint. In the Mule palette, select the HTTP module, click and select the listener. Click and drag that to the canvas, and you'll notice that there is a mouse pointer and a dark line that appears in the canvas, indicating where the listener will be added. Click in order to apply the location. You'll notice that below the listener properties have opened. Click on the path and type in /publish. This will be our endpoint that we'll be calling in order to publish our hyperfile. From the Mule palette, again, click on Core, and in the Component section, select the Flow reference. Underneath the canvas in the Flow reference properties, click the flow name using the arrow and select Get Project. Again, from the Mule palette, click on the Core, and then scroll down to Transformer section and select Set Variable. Click and drag the set variable onto the canvas and place it after the flow reference. This will allow us to save the payload from the Get projects that's being sent back into a variable. In the set variable properties, in the display name, replace it with project ID. Additionally, for the name, we want to name it project ID as well. Next, click on the FX in order to enable DataWeave data transformation. You'll notice that the color will change to show that it has been enabled, and the prompt will show a hashtag. Enter payload 0 and then .id. This ensures that we're only retrieving back the ID. Next, we need to be able to read the data from our census.hyperfile. From the Mule palette, click on the File module and select Read. Click and drag the read after the set variable into the flow. In the Read Properties tab, select the connector configuration and select file_config. In the file path, enter census.hyper. This is the name of our hyperfile that was created. Next, we need to be able to store the data as a binary in a variable. Selecting the core icon and scrolling down to transformers, select set variable. And in the properties, enter the display name and the settings name as well as file content. In the settings section, click on the FX to enable the DataWeave data transformation and enter the payload as shown. Next, we need to build the structure in order to send the correct payload to Tableau Cloud. To do so, from the Mule palette, scroll up to the component section and select Transform Message. Drag the transform message after the set variable. Underneath in the transform message properties, enter in the payload as shown. Ensure to change and have a unique data source name. Notice that in the project, the ID that we're referencing is referencing a variable that we created earlier in the flow. Next, we want to be able to publish our data source. From the Mule palette, click on the Tableau Specialist module and select Publish Data Source. In the properties, we want to select and ensure that the Tableau Online REST configuration is selected. In the Data Source Request options, click and select Publish Data Source Request Body. In the file content, we want to select the FX in order to enable DataWeave transformations and enter in our variable name. In this case, it would be vars.fileContent. In the data source attributes, the payload should already be entered. In the data source file name, enter census.hyper, the name of our hyperfile. Now the last step in our flow is to generate a transform message with the payload data. For this, we're going to go back in the Mule palette and select the core icon, and then click on Transform Message. In the output section, we want to enter in what's shown. Here, we're getting the payload and ensuring that we get a JSON response. Next, save your project by using Control-S or Command-S, depending on your operating system. And in the Package Explorer, we're going to select our parent directory. And then in the menu bar, select Run as Mule Application. Again, we'll wait for this to show deployed. Once the application has been deployed, we're going to go back to Postman. And this time, we're going to select our Publish endpoint. Go ahead and click on Send. And we'll be making our call to publish our data source to Tableau Cloud. You should receive a 200 OK response and a JSON payload describing the data source and location. Once successful, the last step is to validate that our source is live by logging into Tableau Cloud. In Tableau Cloud, we can explore our data sources, and here we can see that we have published our data source and is a live connection. We're now able to update this with the latest data as needed. We can continue to the next section.
All right, so now that we have created our hyper file and published it out to a Tableau Cloud site, now it's time to get to the meaty part and truly build the visualization that's going to tell the story. So we've unlocked some data from the census, we have some local grants data, and we want to tell a story that encompasses everything. So first and foremost, we're going to connect to our data. So let's go ahead and connect to that data that you just published. On your home screen here, you can choose Tableau Server. Once you're signed in to Tableau Server, it's going to pop up with all the different options that have already been published. So in this case, you can actually see some that some of our students or some of our attendees posted during Tableau Conference. I know that the data source that I'm looking for is around census data, so I can go ahead and search for that. I see as a result, I have the census data that Javier posted through the MuleSoft API. Let's go ahead and connect to that. Now that I'm on my working screen here, for those of you who are not familiar with Tableau, let's get just a little oriented here. We have our data pane over here that has all of our dimensions and measures. Dimensions are in blue, measures are in green. We often refer to them as pills just because they have a pill-like shape. We then have our marks card, we have our filters card, our rows and columns, and our worksheet that we're working on. So first and foremost, let's go ahead and graph some of this data that we got from the census. If I take county name, I see that it already has a geographic role assigned to it, and it's indicated by this globe here. So I see that, hey, Tableau said the name of this field is called county. It probably relates to the county that we already have available within Tableau. And so by doing this, Tableau now knows what the latitude and longitude is of this. It knows what the shape is, ultimately where it exists on the globe, etc. So we're going to take advantage of this, and we're going to drag and drop county name over into our sheet. Now, it shows me all the counties that are within the US, but I noticed that there's definitely like some missing ones in here. Like I know that this should be a little bit more dense when it comes to counties. The dot appears at the latitude and longitude of the center of the county, whatever Tableau has on file. But I see down here that we have 432 unknown locations. So let's go ahead and fix that. I can click on it, and then I get the option to edit the locations. From here, I get the notification that, hey, some of these counties are actually ambiguous, meaning they exist in multiple states, and just with the county name, Tableau can't figure out where that's actually supposed to be. Maybe it's Adams County in Alabama, maybe it's Adams County in Nevada, whatever it may be. Tableau can't figure it out without more information. So I see here that we haven't mapped it to the state or province. So in this case, we have the state available. So let's just tell Tableau to reference the state field. Okay. And now we've only got 6 left. We could certainly go back and fix those, but for the time being, let's just use what we have here. If I zoom in onto the continental US right here, I've got all these different dots. Now, I really wanted this to show up as a map, not as dots. Tableau automatically assigned it to dots, but if I wanted to say, hey, actually, can you show this to me in the form of a map? I can go to my marks card and select map. Now I can see all the shape files for all the different counties within the US. Now this is great, but my goal was to say, hey, my grants are or are not indeed serving the communities that they were intended to serve. I see over here that the census has provided us with a field called identified as disadvantaged, and I want to use an aspect of visual analytics to see where those counties are. So I'm going to drag and drop identified as disadvantaged over here onto color. Now Tableau picks some default colors here, and I can see that I have red and orange overlaid together, which isn't always the easiest to tell apart. So I'm actually going to go in and change the colors here. So if I go to the legend over here on the right and I click the drop down, I'm going to edit the colors. Now keep in mind, this census information is secondary information. It's not exactly like the first thing that I want to see or call my attention to. So I want to pick some colors that both tell me what's happening, but also don't distract me from the main point. So in this case, I'm going to go for some of the Seattle grays here. I'm going to set this null to my lightest color. I'm going to set my orange to my second lightest color and my red to my darkest color. So now I can see a lot better where these counties stand out when they need or when they're identified as disadvantaged. So I know that I need to concentrate on those counties with the grants programs that I am creating. Now, this is all great, but I need to be able to see my grants data on here. And my grants data obviously did not come from the census. It comes from my own internal organization. So let's go ahead and connect to the grants data. I can do so by clicking up here on the data tab, and then I can click new data source. I have the grants data downloaded as a CSV here, so I can connect directly to it. I can see that the data has populated. Scroll over just to double check that this is correct. And then I'll go back to the sheet that I was working on. I can see my two data sources here. So I have my census data as well as my grants data. I'm able to overlay these without actually connecting them together, which is a really awesome thing to be able to do in Tableau. But before I do so, I noticed that it's actually kind of hard to see some of these small counties. So before I do that, let me actually change the border here. If I click on the border and choose a lighter color, okay, that's much better. Now I can see where the counties are truly standing out. So let's go ahead and take our zip code from our grants data and let's overlay it. If I pick up the zip pill and I drag it over, I want to drop it on top of this section that says add a marks layer. Now it's really hard to see, but I did get some dots on here. So since these are hard to see, they blend in too much, let's pick another thing to add to color. In this case, I want to look at the different statuses via color. That is certainly much better. But as we all know, visual analytics can be multi-dimensional. So I actually want to add one more dimension to this and look at how much was awarded in each of these areas. So I can click on award amount and drag it onto size. Let's make these just a little bit bigger. And let's also give it a border so it just stands out. Now we can see exactly where the different grants were applied for and where they were awarded. Now I can see that I have approved, pending, denied. Let's add a filter here. Let's look at our grant status and be able to filter it. I'll go ahead and check all of them for the time being. And now I have a filter that I can use. Now, I know I'm going to use this data elsewhere in the dashboard. So I can either leave this filter and add the other filters manually, or I can go ahead and apply this to all using this data source. Now let's go ahead and give this the title of map. So we've already got a little bit of a story here, right? Like we've got some dark spots in here that we haven't awarded any grants to. Same over here in Oregon, we've got some dark spots up here in Montana. So there are definitely communities that need to be reached out to in order to receive grant money. Now let's take a look at just how much grant money we've awarded. Let's create a new sheet here. You can do so by clicking on the new sheet icon and opening up a brand new sheet. Let's look at our different grant programs. So if we take grant program and we drop it over here on rows, we get each of the programs that our agency is responsible for distributing money for. Then let's go ahead and say, let's see this by award amount. So we can drag and drop award amount over into columns. And now I can see exactly how much money has been awarded to each of these programs. I can actually sort it and I see, hey, research has actually received the most amount of money, with infrastructure being the least amount. Now I can call this award by program, or award amount by program. Now it's time to create a brand new sheet. Let's look at how much money we've awarded over time. So if I go here to a new sheet, then I can look at my award date. I have it here. I want to drag this into my columns. Now I do notice that it sets it as a discrete pill, and I actually want this to be continuous. So I can either choose continuous here, or I can select one of the continuous aggregations. So I want to do quarters. Now, the great thing about Tableau is when it reads in a data set, it automatically generates a count of the rows. Now, I'm familiar with this data set, and I know that each row constitutes a single grant. So I know that I can go ahead and use this predefined field, but otherwise, you might want to go in and create a count distinct of a unique identifier. In this case, it would be one and the same. So I'm just going to use what Tableau has already generated for me. This tells me exactly how many grants have been awarded. So if it has an award date, then it counts. Now I can use a quick aspect of AI here. And if I wanted to create a forecast, let's just go ahead and look at how many grants we're looking at awarding in the future. I'll click Show Forecast. Here you can see that we've used an exponential smoothing algorithm to predict out what would happen in the future. So we are predicting that in Q2 of 2024, we're going to get 7 grants, 10 in Q3 of 2024, and this shaded area is our confidence interval. So we are 95% confident that we are going to fall somewhere within this shaded area in the coming months. Now we can call this grants over time. Now it's time to actually assemble our dashboard. So this is the fun part. We've got 3 elements that we can go ahead and put on a dashboard. So let's click New Dashboard here. When I click New Dashboard, I see all the sheets that I've created, and I have the ability to drag and drop them onto the dashboard itself. So let's just pick and choose. Let's do a map here, an award amount, and some time. I see here that I've got quite a few legends. You can either keep these and relocate them. In this case, I'm just going to get rid of them to save some space here. But I do want to go ahead and add in that filter that I had created. I can do so by clicking on any of these sheets, dropping down and adding the filter. In this case, let's do grant status. Now I have an interactive dashboard. If I wanted to say, hey, where are we not awarding data or awarding grants where we should be? I can just filter out my denied, and now I can see exactly where these counties are. So I see that we've got a couple of suspended grants over in some of these darker counties. I can click on those and figure out why we're actually seeing those as suspended. I can also take a look at my data guide here. So looking very quickly at my data guide, I see that my AI has actually detected that there are some outliers. In terms of grants that have not been denied, we certainly have a high amount of money going towards education. When I click on that, I can get even more details as to why. And it actually appears that there is one extreme value where all this money was awarded for a grants application. And that's actually something I might want to go take a look at. So in Colorado, we see exactly which grant information is causing us to be outliers here. So yeah, it's a really cool opportunity and a really cool story that we've made here. So I hope you enjoyed the session and enjoyed the demo. And thank you so much again for attending.